Hello. Welcome everyone. Thank you very much for joining today and welcome to today's session. A huge thank you also to the dMSA team for setting up this event, as well as to our participants joining us today. And I'm especially grateful that our panelists from Ukraine are joining and found the time to join despite the hostile situation and regular power outages, especially in the evening. So thank you very much for being here. Today's session is titled Decolonizing Memory in Wartime Ukraine, Cultural Heritage and Democratic Transformation, as I'm sure you all know. And over the next hour, we will explore how contemporary art and cultural heritage serve Ukraine to decolonize memory from centuries of Russian imperial dominance, while at the same time enabling new and democratic practices to emerge. Before we begin, I will shortly introduce myself and our panelists. So my name is Sophia. I'm a PhD student at the London School of Economics, and my research revolves around the role of cultural programming and the arts in post-colonial and post-conflict identity, focusing, amongst others, on Ukraine. And I'm very much looking forward to moderating the session today, and I'm very happy to welcome our panelists. So with me today, I have Yulia Khnat, who is the co-founder of the NGO Museum of Contemporary Art, which includes the Ukrainian Museum of Contemporary Art and the Ukrainian Emergency Art Fund. Yulia co-curates the post-war memory culture in Ukraine project, and she also works as an expert on memory and identity issues at RESPOL, the Rapid Expert Support for Culture and Media Policies in Ukraine. I'm also happy to welcome Yulia Ovcharenko, who is the president of the Cultural Hub NGO in Ukraine, and she's been creating, curating, and developing civil society organizations in Ukraine for over 15 years, and has co-founded the Dnipro Center for Contemporary Culture, the NGO Kultura Medialna, as well as the Construction Festival. And then we also have Dr. Henry Redwood, who is a senior lecturer in war studies at King's College London. Henry's research focuses specifically on how communities are formed through and as a result of war, with particular attention to the role of the arts. And his current work in Ukraine examines how arts programming responds to war trauma and contributes to community rebuilding. And today's conversation is inspired by some work that I was doing for the U4 Anti-Corruption Resource Center over the last 6 months, which is also how I met Yulia and Yulia. I was working on a report on how cultural programming can support democratic development and anti-corruption in Ukraine. And in conversations with Yulia and Yulia, they both highlighted the importance of not only looking at the connection between culture and the arts and democracy, but also to consider memory, especially in the Ukrainian context. And this then led me to connect with Henry, whose research on community formation through war and trauma will provide a very crucial analytical frameworks for understanding these processes in our conversation today. The key proposition that sort of emerged from our conversations leading up to this roundtable is that colonial dependence, manifested through the suppression of local memory and culture, has damaged social trust and severed communities from their cultural roots, creating conditions where new democratic institutions struggle to take hold. And when we talk about democratic transformation here, we are referring to the deeper work of rebuilding social trust, creating spaces for civic engagement, and developing institutions that embody dialogue, transparency, and community participation. And here, contemporary Ukrainian art and culture can emerge as a powerful tool, functioning both as a medium for articulating democratic values and also as a means of re-establishing connections with suppressed heritage traditions. Today's event will take off with the panelists each introducing themselves again and sharing kind of their take on this proposition and how it relates to their work. And then afterwards, we'll engage in a conversation between the panelists, guided by some questions. And then we will open the floor for questions or comments from the audience. So until this Q&A session, audience microphones and cameras will be disabled, and then you'll be able to unmute yourselves and turn on your cameras if you wish to do that, and to raise your hands via the raise hand function. And the chat function will also be disabled, but both the audience and speakers can submit questions and comments via the designated Q&A chat, which Ekaterina from the organizing team and I will monitor. Ekaterina will also ensure that all questions are visible to participants. And as you know from when you registered for this event, it will be recorded. So yeah, we can go back to it afterwards. But yeah, now I'll give the floor to our panelists to introduce themselves and their work. And I'm very much looking forward to the next hour and a half together. Thank you.
Thank you for having us here and organizing this conversation. Yeah, maybe I will start and trying just to give a framework to this big topic. Yeah, that all the parts of it announced, they deserve much attention. But for me, as a cultural practitioner, war raised a lot of questions, and that questions of such big depth and complexity influenced first of all the programming, the answer what do we do, what is our part as professionals in this crisis, and here philosophy appeared as a field where we can actually discuss that kind of complexity, and culture is at the same time the space for this dialogue. So us as humans who suddenly appear in war, despite of all the knowledge from the history we knew, and despite all our preparations, it never helps enough to be prepared to the war. Yeah, so being inside the war situation makes us ask ourselves very fundamental questions like who am I as an individual, or who are we as citizens? Do I pay attention to the society and fight for both myself and society, or it's just my deal? Yeah, it's just what I care about individually, who we are as a family, as a community, as society or nation. Yeah, how do we define ourselves as a nations, and at the same time, who are the others? Can we redefine what is good and what is evil, and how we give the answers? Yeah, what our answers are based on. So this reassertion of identity is really unfolding in multiple levels, on the individual, social level, and the level of entire ethical systems. And all the practices we knew before, they are like zeroed at the moment at one time. Yeah, and we need to find new words to reshape them. And all the writers, they said at the beginning of the full-scale invasion, we don't have enough words to describe everything. Yeah, this new vocabulary needed to be found, and where to find this. Yeah, so this research started in the cultural heritage, in our past, in our history, in our literature, where we tried to find what was before, what kind of experiences we could take from the past, and maybe reassemble our actions today. What is irrelevant? What is actual? What can be taken? And where are we creative? Because if we take this war as a long period of 100 years, And we can go back to the beginning of the 20th century, to the first drive of state building of Ukraine. So all this past is there, even if quite forgotten during the 70 years of the Soviet occupation. And now we can just reassemble these two periods of time and think as a continuous period of our state building, and bring all the knowledge from the past for today. I would also stress that lots of the knowledge of the cultural heritage is in hands of our Ukrainian diaspora, of all the global Ukrainians who continued to work and create and write and be a society, a big unity outside of the like continental Ukraine or mainland Ukraine. And most of these connections are lost. And now it's another chance to reconnect all together and bring that knowledge from all around the world to our actual knowledge. This is how we rediscover the names of our artists, of our aristocracy, that we understand Ukrainians is not just peasants nation, what the Soviets tried to convince Ukrainian society, that we have a huge undiscovered literature heritage, that our persons, public figures of international level were always present. This is all needs a new dialogue, new rediscovery, and this all what happens in these years. So the number of cultural events happening in Ukraine now, the discussions, presentations, exhibitions, theater performances, all of that is much more active than it's been before. This is how collective brain of Ukraine is working now, trying to reassemble this collective identity. I would like also to stress like a very moral points of very ethical points of our identity. So am I a person of will, of like inner strength, or violence, lawlessness? This defines the actions of many people right now. Or am I? Do I act like from sila, from strength, or from nasila, violence? These words are really good correlating in Ukrainian language and can be translated in many aspects also in English. But still, it's all about humanity, and all about being a civilized person. And in this framework, we try to think philosophically and also define what is dehumanizing practice and what does it mean to be a human today. It's not about just the body or my physical basic needs. It's all about social, cultural, and ethical levels that make us a human, actually. It's so huge, actually. That I'm trying to just give some points to that on culture at all. On culture in very wide framework. And the last, maybe for the beginning, I would stress the connection between generations. So the generation who was born during the Ukrainian independence and who grew up with already democratic political culture, they are very sensitive to every act of violation of human rights, of fundamental rights. They didn't experience directly the influences of KGB structures or of these secret societies that were always present during the Soviet time. Yeah, so this is good and bad at the same time. Good because they don't have this dehumanizing experience, but they also don't have enough knowledge. So this dialogue between the generation of our parents and grandparents, who were political prisoners, dissidents, writers, and researchers from the last century. This is all important to share this knowledge and keep this heritage also of the tragedies of the last century, so the today's generation can get this knowledge and explain better what is happening now, why is this war, what can we do, and what is behind our decisions. Yeah, so culture also gives very good examples how we learn from the past. Literature, theater, intellectual knowledge, history. There is a really boom of interest to this academic and also popular knowledge, how we explain the numbers of YouTube channels and intellectuals popularizing this knowledge from the past. Yeah, so maybe that will be for beginning from myself, and I'm really looking forward for discussion we have today.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thank you very much. I give the floor to the other Julia now, if you're ready. Thanks.
Thank you, Julia, for this starting point and this framework, kind of philosophical framework, and struggling of cultural practitioner. And I just wanted to give some understanding how our organization works in German Museum of Contemporary Art based in Kyiv. And we have been working since 2020 on creating this new kind of museum institution for contemporary art. We call it Ukrainian Museum of Contemporary Art, or UMCA. And for us, it was important that we develop the concept of network institution, not because of our just imagination, but because grounding this on the specific landscape and specific situation in Ukraine and challenges which we have. So this our approach combines contemporary art, cultural policy, institutional development, and with the focus on this local themes, the connection of community and cultural heritage of this community, and what is important, not only build or restore this connection, but also to give this national acoustic and international relations around this. And of course, all these processes are interconnected. And also for us important to build capacities to work with complexity. And we understand that we are in the field of memory culture and its dynamics for a long time because of huge challenges in this field now, and our past and approaches from our past. And of course, the focus on community building is very important for art, because it's like one of key factors of doing together in dealing and addressing the huge challenges together. And maybe that is why we, from the start of full-scale invasion, our work dedicated to so-called large-scale effort, I would say. That is why our cultural projects are maybe bigger than somebody could suggest. And what is also important, as Sophia mentioned, when we had this conversation about anti-corruption, There is, we highlighted also important focus in our work. It's that restoring connections with suppressed and or marginalized heritage is essential for democratic development, because democracy is sustained not only by institutions but by trust, dignity, and shared sense of belonging. And in Ukraine's case, centuries of colonial dependence means not only political subordination, but or also the denial of the right to our own memory and culture. And when societies are cut off from the historical and cultural roots, this erodes shared values and deepens mistrust towards state institutions. And such mistrust becomes fertile ground for corruption. When institutions are not perceived as representing collective dignity and identity, they are not seen as a common responsibility. And to connecting with suppressed heritage restores this cultural agency. It affirms the right to narrate our own history and strengthens the value framework rooted in integrity and accountability. And in this process, contemporary art plays crucial role, in our opinion. It creates space for critical reflection, addressing trauma, and reestablishes a living dialogue with tradition, and of course promoting democratic principles, of course, but not as a topic, but as a practice. And of course, there is raising civic responsibility through these processes. And restoring suppressed heritage is therefore not an act of nostalgia, but a structural democratic act. And it helps rebuild dignity, reinforce trust in institutions, and cultivate culture of integrity, which is very important in our opinion. And without reclaiming cultural memory, democratic reforms remain fragile, and with it they gain depth, legitimacy, and long-term resilience. It was my first take on the topic, and also I have the thinking about in Ukrainian context we have from one hand this huge history of resistance, and we have this long history of resistance from 19th century, Ukrainian classic, defending Ukrainian identity in the framework of Russian Empire, the beginning of 20th century, so-called executed Renaissance, and history of our 60s, and then rebuilding, so-called perestroika, and then in 2014, our resistance become not marginalized practice, but as a kind of mainstream. It appeared in cultural institutions and different places. And from the 2022, it became the common space. And this is like Ukrainian history. At the same time, in our context, there are two remarkable or prominent examples of so-called Western implantation initiative in the field of democratization and cultural development. This notably the Soros Centers for Contemporary Art and Manifesto Biennial. And these initiatives unfolded in Ukraine with varying degrees of success. So we have the story of establishing Soros Center and the re-establishing or like transformation of this institution, and different level of influence of the concept of that institution, and becoming more running by Ukrainian practitioners, I would say. And then Manifesto Biennial as another initiative which started conversation to establish here the event and then institutions as a result of this event. And there is another story of success, actually not success. And it's interesting to see that, for example, the foundation, instance, international instance foundations, which is foundation as the institution which started this support of the contemporary culture in Ukraine, contemporary art in particular. And now they nowadays, when our organization is working on establishing this new concept of network museum, International Instance Foundation supports this effort, but it's like supports that the autonomy and the specific concept which is very relevant to our situation in Ukraine. And it's interesting field to research, to study this dynamic and different success story, I would say. I will finish at this moment and then we'll continue.
Yeah, thank you very much. And now on to Henry. Thanks.
Hi, thanks, Sophia. Thanks for putting the the panel together and yeah, for coming up with an interesting set of provocations for us to think through. I mean, I guess in the broad picture, lots of what I was going to say, I think, is more or less being covered by both Yulia's. So I guess I'll try and be more succinct in what I'll say. And so we can move on to some questions in a dialogue between us and the audience. I think what's already been suggested, I think, which has been central to my research, both in Ukraine and outside of it, is the central role that archives of both arts and cultural institutions, but also state-led archives are sort of an integral role through which we can understand how communities are created and governed and ultimately controlled. I think one of the things that working in Ukraine has led me to rethink is some of the dynamics that we see as inherent in these practices, because often much of our work in this space draws on quite different colonial experiences, and I think that sometimes leads us to misread the current practices that are taking place in Ukraine and the role that history or undoing or rethinking history and memory plays. Because I think in many respects we see the archive as principally this site of control, and I think it is primarily that. It's one through which communities are imagined, brought into being, and constrained. But I guess in the context of Ukraine, there's an additional layer to that, which is if we're thinking about comparing them to like British colonial archives in places like India and elsewhere, it's more than just about control, because it's also about assimilation. It's about the direct attempt to eradicate and destroy life and all expressions of that life as found through it in any form that doesn't sit within the archival imagination. So this is, I guess, an even more violent form of archival practice and state building to that we see perhaps in other forms of our archival politics or archival governance, and I think speaks to, in a very direct and overt way, to what people like Nicholas Mirozev talk about as these sites of representations, where the archives, these sites of representations where violent and indeed genocidal ordering is imposed upon a community, and we've already heard about lots of that from both of the Julias. But I guess it's I think something that I found increasingly important or like potent to understand is just, I guess, the level of erasure that is contained within this, and the intimate relationship through which the constitution of archive and sites of history and memory making within the USSR were directly about this erasure and violence and the bringing of death. We see this, I guess, acutely in moments like the purges in the 1930s, but this is a sort of more or less, and it's never even, and it's never total, and I'll get to that in a second. But it's this sort of very continuous, very violent act of erasure and control. And I think in this way we see this very direct relationship between culture and governance. They're sort of part and parcel of the same constitution of an authoritarian state. And it, I guess, makes me think of a very example of Walter Benjamin's idea of the aestheticizing of politics, where these two principles become more or less concretely interwoven, which is why also I think the arts and culture have such an important role to play, as they always have done. And I think we'll get to that in some of our questions, in contesting contemporary historical legacies of this form of authoritarian control. And I think we see this very acutely. You know, I'll let Julia talk about her work with MOCA NGO, but I think that's a very acute example of this, where we have both the reimagining of national identity and community, but also a very literal reorganization of the institutional structures of society, right? So this is both simultaneously about telling new stories, but also about how we tell those stories that matters, and the types of people and institutions that are given voice within in this space. I think we can also see this in the proliferation of civil society organizations that exist, that are doing similar work, but in different ways and in different sites. Like we've been working a lot with an organization called Art Dot, who are based in Lviv, that are about creating this alternative governance structure that is, I guess, more grassroots in the way that it conceives of itself, and looks to create spaces for different forms of community to exist through artistic practices. And I guess the final thing I'll say is what's already been said, which I think is really important, is that this isn't in many respects new. This is all building on a legacy of resistance and counter-archival practices that exist within the Ukrainian context. So I guess this is where I would push back a little bit on the work of, I guess, people like Anne Stoller, around this sense that the archive is only ever the perspective of the colonizer, right? So there's this sense that we can only read the archive from this as a site of ethnography to understand colonial governance as practice, and rather I think that it's never a totalizing activity. There's always an excess within it that resists these attempts to erase and control, which we're seeing with the sort of return to historical figures now to understand the contemporary moment and the past simultaneously. And I mean, I recently went to, there's an exhibition at the Photographers Gallery at the moment, focusing on the work of Boris Nikolaev. And I think that to me was a great example of this sort of historical contestation of these regimes of control, particularly through the contestation of the Soviet regime and its practices of governmentality through materials of the Soviet republics. I think I found particularly interesting. But there's also something that you see towards the end of the exhibition, where you see some more contemporary examples of the work that he did on Maidan, where whilst simultaneously they speak to a very similar aesthetic practice to his critiques of Soviet marches from a different era. There's also something more. There's also perhaps a greater alignment between his aesthetic vision and the current political moment. There's less there's less of an overt intervention that he makes on the frame in those images, which to me speaks to this, I guess, the emergence of a reordering of the aesthetic regime in his work and the democratic or that moment of democracy and liberation that was that Yulia was talking about as being the moment where this stops being in the margins and enters to the mainstream. So I think throughout all of this, I think we can see how aesthetics and cultural practice and cultural archives are both the sites through which power is exerted, but isn't always has been contested. And I think this moment of contestation is, I guess, just being brought more squarely into the mainstream or the dominant frame through which Ukrainian institutions like MOCA and GO are working today. So I think that's, yeah, I'll stop there for the opening comment and I look forward to our discussion.
Yeah, thank you all so much for your introductions and for already stimulating our minds. I think yeah, I'll Julia, you have your hand open, so I will give the floor straight to you without an introduction.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just wanted to react to what Henry just said about the archives and archiving process. And, I just remember that in my introduction, I didn't describe that now, right today, actually, we have this research of artistic scene of one of regions of Ukraine from the second half of 20th century to our days, and the group of researchers they are trying to see into the artistic process, but through the lens of current day, yeah, and to see the practice also through both lenses, from the context of that artistic practices at that time, but at the same time through the lens of our understanding what is the art for today society. And it's interesting that because our group of these researchers, together with curator of this research, we are developing the to approach to archive the findings. Yeah, so it's like it is also interesting to archive these artistic practices, to analyze these, but also to reflect the way how the group is working now, and to reflect this approach of archiving. And then a lot of interesting things are going on. Thank you, Henry.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much for this reaction straight away. And I think I'll also build on how Henry just ended his introductory points, which is Ukrainian art and culture having this very long history of resistance, as you had mentioned, in many different forms. So I think the first question that I would pose to the panelists now is how you see, you kind of already touched upon it a bit, but how you see today's cultural work building on or departing from these, and how does this potentially push beyond limits of understanding arts in war as mainly an act of reconciliation, but rather potentially an act of resistance. I don't know who of you feels like speaking first.
I can start. from the just to tell a few words about our archive, the Wartime archive, which was started as a curatorial observation. Now we are thinking this material and the way of working with this, and but it was started from the observation and archiving the pictures of these artworks and analyzing the processes of this of reactions. What art was from the start of full-scale invasion, and how the dynamics was. And we represented as an exhibition in 2023 and see this huge spectrum of artistic reactions on the events, on circumstances in war, on people's reaction on this war, and of course there might be then Henry can add also how there was different perspectives on that material from inside Ukraine and from outside Ukraine and from different academician perspectives, people's perspectives, because a lot huge audience interacted with that artworks, and we didn't describe that exhibition as curatorial exhibition actually, because there was a concept that the curator is time, because it couldn't be reflected at that time. It was like fixation of a huge spectrum of reactions. Maybe it's an entry point. And then
I would also like to catch up to Henry's and Julia's points. I just noticed, that this boom and striving of new artistic practices became also possible because of the liberation of this space from the Russification. That all the Russian voices that tried to take the space and silence Ukrainian voices, that was so obvious just after they are gone. So the resistance, I think, was much stronger even before the full-scale invasion. So Ukrainian voices tried to find really hard the space to be heard, to be respected, to get the audiences, because the mass culture, first of all, coming from the Russian info space, it was everywhere, on television, in books, in movies, in shows. It was so much present and so much erasing also the other processes that it was quite hard for Ukrainian artists to find their place. And after this all was gone, so the Russian media were officially banned, and the Russian language literature was out of the market, and the Russian media also became limited. This all gave finally the free space for Ukrainian initiatives to rise, and that's what naturally happened. The good and very natural interest of Ukrainian society to own culture, to own past and the contemporary processes that started to bloom. And this was only not only that became possible because of the liberation of the space from Russian presence.
I think I would just add a couple of very short points. I mean, one, I guess there's a lot of continuity in the way in which artistic and cultural practices are used to respond to imperial colonial aggression. But I think one thing that I found striking is how so much of this also moves beyond the direct frame of just being an act of resistance against something, rather than also a reimagining of what is, or of the community of an identity of Ukraine. What does it mean to be Ukrainian today? And I think when I was in Lviv in 2024, there was an exhibition in memory of the one who keeps the memory at the Jam Factory. And I think what I found striking about that was this, I guess, very reflexive form of nationalism that was being cultivated in the space, that is about reimagining national identity through feminist or indigenous perspectives. So this is very different to how we would imagine the mobilization of arts, or as perhaps more propagandist in a like a wartime context, to a different way into the question. And I think we see the same with what's happening with civil society practices, that it's moving beyond the sort of frame of Russian aggression to redefining the role of civil society within the broader political ecosystem of the nation. So this is, and again, this links back to, I think, why I think the UMCA project is so important, because it's about this reimagining of the configurations of power at an institutional or at an institutional level. I mean, in relation to reconciliation, I mean, I think you're right. It's interesting. I think we normally associate art, especially within, I guess, the British context or British research context. Arts is seen as peace-orientated practices, right? And so most of the research comes in the aftermath of conflict, where we look at how arts play a role in reconciliation and that type of dynamic. And I think now is not the time for that conversation within the context of Ukraine. I think that's very obvious. But what to go to Yulia's point about the Wartime Art Archive, when you look at the types of works that's being produced, it's very confronting of our assumed frameworks of what I think artistic responses should look like, because it's often very visceral, it's often very angry, which are not emotions that we normally as sort of encourage in how we think about this type of work. Not to say that they haven't been seen in other war-related contexts, but I think it is confronting of us in many respects in how we see and understand the role of art in these conflicts. So I think there is a reimagining to be done, which is conveniently a project that me and Yulia are working on at the moment, to do with exactly reimagining what do we mean by war art through the practice of contemporary Ukrainian artists.
And I was thinking also about the other answers on the question about the role of art in the war context. And of course, during our activities of our NGO, we should respond to different challenges, not only for representing culture or representing art and I don't know, promoting something or delivering some messages, yeah. But we had to deal with surprising aspects of the art field or field of representation, I would say. For example, a huge challenge of memorization, a lot of requests from communities, from different groups to represent their perception of the event, their losses, and that other types of working with this request, then through artistic practices, they cannot deliver. They can respond in a full scale, I would say. That is why our NGO started to work in this field, in the spreading the ways of involving artistic practices in the memory work, and to help people to reimagine or to see different ways to represent grief, memory, and other feelings. And this is the big role, a huge role of art in current context, and also other totally different direction is the consider the role of art in as an asset owned by functions people who are involved and were involved in supporting Kremlin regime, for example, and the considering the whole system of circulating of ownership, symbolic values, and actually evolved cultural heritage, which a lot of high value art owned by people who used this for status, for leverage, for having leverage and influence in cultural institution and elites. So it's a very big topic of for research, in my opinion, and because of establishing the platform dedicated to this, also to this topic, there were started some researchers dedicated to this, and there are a lot of directions to analyze the penetration of all these things. It's not exhaustive, even the list.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks. I think I might ask one final question that we kind of spoke a bit about before already, and then open the floor to the general audience. But one thing that I kind of heard from all of your contributions now is how art and culture, once more accessible, enables citizens to imagine and create alternative understandings of the present, but also the future. So maybe one last question from my side would be how you kind of see this transition from creative practice to political practice, and how you understand these practices, and how you maybe also see it enhancing participants' sense of agency or political engagement. This would be my last question, and then I'm curious to hear what the audience has in their heads. Thanks.
You're very interested in a complex point. Yeah, thinking on processes go behind the artistic practice. Yeah, what is the agency? It's just to allow yourself to be creative. Yeah, to be expressive, to raise own voice, yeah, and be vulnerable in that. This is what all the artists and cultural practitioners experience. Yeah, if we try something new, or we rediscover some practices, it can be risky. We don't know how the society reacts on that, but it's very much needed to gain own agency back. especially when we speak about very painful experiences. When art reflects on very painful experiences, on like death, grief, dramatic emotional experiences, and public space becomes then the space for dialogue about that. Yeah, and suddenly we can discover that the others experienced the same, and we can share that. And this is how trust to each other emotions and each other experiences is making us similar. This is very important for the society who experienced authoritarian regimes before. Yeah, where trust has been damaged by many violations of power, many abuse experiences. Being together now on a concert, in the theater, visiting exhibition, creates a space for new, better experiences for us, for better expressions, and this is very, very vital now. Even if it's a space where you can cry. Yeah, so during a concert, sitting in a dark room and being ready for own emotions, this is where we are humans on that very basic level.
I would like to add in the context of role of art in reconciliation and towards peace, etc. I'm thinking about the time in a positive way, considering the art, and I think that we should cultivate the good culture of conflict, I would say, and space for agonistic expressions. I mean, when we have different stories, we should have space to represent this, to express our feelings, to even to keep conflict and to develop this conflict towards the some findings, etc. And we shouldn't avoid conflict. And of course, I think that this culture of artistic resistance in 100 or 200 years is a good ground for this. That is why some art historians say that art in Ukraine since 2004, from Orange Revolution, is the politically engaged art, which became the mainstream, and so it's like art which integrated in this political nature of art is in our practices always, and this critical discourse of Ukrainian artists, and so even as I mentioned earlier, another story about the state institutions and policy on the national level regarding these political practices, artistic practices with political nature. But even we see these changes and in our state institutions, and maybe not only see but also contributing with that processes, and even so from 2001 until 2022 almost all the competitions to represent National Pavilion at Venice Biennial were with scandals, etc. It's because the Minister of Culture was the commissar of the National Pavilion. But this first year, when it wasn't, maybe not first, but maybe second, but without scandals, and this message is very political. It's called the artwork, the project which will represent Ukraine on 61st Venice Biennial of Contemporary Art will be is titled Security Guarantees, and it's central object of the project is Жанна Kadyrova's sculpture Origami Beer, and the work created by Жанна Kadyrova and Denis Ruban, and it's a great artwork, and I wish all success to it. So my statement is that it was always political.
I mean, that, yeah, I think that was the point that I was going to make, which is that I think I don't see that there is any line between creative imagination and political work. And I think in some respects, you're either reinforcing a frame or contesting it, but in either way, you're making some sort of political statement through practice. And whilst, yes, I think we see a lot of examples where the way in which cultural practice is taking place is reinforcing of agency or new expressions of agency and new types of subjectivity. At the same time, I would, just reinforce what Yulia was saying, which is it's not always so, right? And there remains still a lot of work to be done in terms of contesting the legacies of previous ways of governing and controlling, which even in a free democratic Ukraine haven't transpired across all institutional practices. And I've seen, and to be honest, this is something that at the moment there's at times I see a friction or resistance at play between these different levels of power, which underutilizes the current strength of I think Ukrainian civil society and doesn't always harness it, I think, to its full effects, because it's seen as ultimately challenging in some ways. So there's a potential there for it to bring around new political communities based on different distributions of agency, but it's not always so. And I think it's evident there's more work and ongoing work that needs to be done.
Definitely.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think now we have a bit over 20 minutes left, which I think is probably a good time to open the floor to the audience and kind of allow audience members to also ask the questions that they might have. I think if Ekaterina is still here, the audience now should be able to unmute and turn on cameras if you would want that, and then raise your hands if you'd like to do that. And if not, maybe now the Q&A chat should be enabled. But I'm waiting for Ekaterina's confirmation of that.
Yes, so if anyone from attenders have any questions to our presenters, you can raise your hand and then I will unmute your micro and you can be able to turn on your camera and microphone. Or we have, as Sophia said, we have Q&A session. So if you don't want to do it out loud, you can leave your question in our session, and then we will publish it, and everybody can read it and answer you. So yeah, and respond. Sorry, yeah.
Great, thank you. There is a hand. Yeah, I see the hand of Kriti Sonkar.
Yeah. Hi guys. First of all, congratulations on the very brilliant presentation and conversation, all of you. I was just interested because I come from a literary background, so I was interested in knowing or understanding, how we can decolonize memory through art and cultural practices. When we talk about wartime memory and wartime culture, without aestheticizing trauma, while still trying to make space for a democratic dialogue. So, if any one of you could take that up.
Could I ask a clarifying question, which is, I guess, what do you see as the risk of aestheticizing trauma? Like, how are you understanding that process?
Right. So, I'm very new. I'm a beginner PhD scholar, so I've been studying a lot. I'm working in the field of childhood trauma. So, I've been convoluted with this question. When we see trauma, when we try to read about trauma, there's a risk associated with it. Then that when we try to empathize with the characters of the novel or the fiction, we have a tendency to over empathize, and in that aesthetize the trauma. So to maintain a good balance between being objective while at the same time having empathy for the stories that we are creating and talking about, how do we maintain that balance if we can?
I can say from my perspective,
Okay.
thank you for your question. My perspective is shaped from a few fields, I would say, from the um, artistic fields. I mean, like our institution, through the work of our institution, but also from the memorialization field, and also from the psychology field. So then, the problem of aestheticization for me, it's it can be solved through the authentic, I would say, authentic professional response. I think that, and I think that there is no standard of balance. And when we work with some particular group or community of people who are traumatized or were traumatized by circumstances, by the experience in the traumatized event, there is their particular feelings and their particular experience, and work if it's a visual artist, or if it's an author of some textbook, etc. This is the empathy on the ground. There should be empathy on the ground. It's not some universal tool. And not every person is traumatized. Not every person who experienced the traumatizing event, not every person was traumatized. And the request for representation of that experience in some particular work, if it's memorial, or if it's some visual work, or if it's text, it's the balancing on the ground, the conversation.
Thank you.
This answer.
I mean, I'm not sure I totally understand the problem in terms of objective versus empathy. I would say I would like reframe it. I guess the way that I approach the problems of the aesthetic representation of trauma in my work is, I guess there's often a tendency in how we commemorate trauma or represent it to close down space for political contestation, right? We very quickly often have the impositions of particular frameworks that tell us how trauma should be represented, how it should be narrated, how it should be expressed, and it either conforms to it or it doesn't. And for me, the power of art's work, and again, I think go and look at the Wartime Art Archive or other examples of this, is that it doesn't do that, or it at least has the potential not to do that, and keeps different modes of representation alive, and with it, I think, a greater ability to confront what is the cause of the trauma in the first place. So often we try and sanitize representations of trauma to depoliticize them. So I think part of the challenge is how we keep that political potential alive and how we encounter trauma through different types of creative practice.
Right. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Julia, did you unmute yourself to also respond, or sorry, not? Okay, yeah, because then I see another a second question by Anakin Lanes. You can. Yeah.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, I'm comparative literary scholar for Tallinn University, Estonia, also working in memory studies and the arts. So I have a question to all pre-presenters. So I hope it doesn't sound disrespectful or insensitive in these times of war. But I was thinking of how do you understand the work with cultural archives and going back to pre Soviet times or Soviet Russian times, because do we understand it still as a constructivist move, not an essentialist one? Because I mean, when we go back to these cultural archives, we also construct this continuity with this past. At least for me, because in the 90s in Estonia, we also returned to the interwar Estonian Republic, and only later understood that it was definitely also a construction we needed in this point of time to construct a new society and so on, but definitely not. I mean, a construction that omitted a lot of the historical reality of this interwar republic. And the related question is that of implication, because as we know, how the Soviet power worked, that Soviet colonialism has also some other types of colonialism that by implicating local people, so it's not just suppressing Ukrainianness and Ukrainians, but many Ukrainians also collaborated with Soviets like Estonians did, and there were all these very complicated mechanisms of adaptation to power and implication. So is it at all, like, do artists deal with this question at all, the question of implication, responsibility in keeping up that power, or do you see no space for it in the wartime? Because I mean, even in peaceful times in the past 35 years, it has been very difficult for Estonians and other Soviet republics to deal with this question of implication. But so do you need any need for it, or is it a topic at all in Ukraine? Because I see that in a context of war, we need something else. Maybe we cannot deal with it in the first hand. Thanks.
Julia, you will start, or I can.
Yeah, it's a very complex question you put, and it's true. Yeah, go into our history, trying to find the basics of our culture of nation there. It can sound artificial, Like history is all the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves, yeah, or we tell about the others. I see many processes of rethinking of what do we know from the past, yeah, and trying to divide that knowledge that was influenced by Soviet propaganda, yeah, from the true knowledge, like intellectual history. Who were the personalities we know as heroes or we know as our most important cultural figures? Yeah, do we know their biography that well that we can say, yeah, that's our true knowledge. We agree with everything we know, and we know where to put it in all the on all the shelves of our history. I see that as process of cleaning, of repairing maybe this knowledge and trying to reassemble the full picture. And many manipulations I see as well. So yeah, it's true. People are subjective that try to highlight something. They try to pick their favorites and make their explain their own history as nice from the nice side. And here it's really the edge to the propaganda, very very narrow, but still, yeah, this is the dialogue. And when we talk about that, and the voices who speak about our past today, they define the new story.
I can add that I see space for that discussions. I see that requests. I see people who are problematizing manipulations, and so it's like not some marginal process, but I see it as the voices who has level of representation, who have level of representation, and that is why when I described our focus for our organization, which is working on establishing the new institution, there is this moment was highlighting that we need this building this capability to work with complexity. Yeah, so with complex history, with representation of this, with analyzing archives and links and connections and understanding the processes, and we are working on this, and we see that space and voices, and there is discussion. There is no just demand or request for the some glorification. If I'm correctly understood your question. We keep the space.
I mean, I think the only thing that I would add is, if I understood the premise of at least the first part of the question, I guess the archival imagination is always or centrally created in the present moment. So, of course, the reimagining of past archival works or culture is created from the urgency of the current moment. I think that is always the case, that there is always a false continuity imposed. There is always, we find new questions to ask of these contexts based on our current need. That just means that it's never a static practice, right? And so you're right, I think what we're doing now, or what is being done now, at some point in the future will be critiqued, new narratives will emerge. And I see that as a healthy process, or at least an inevitable one that can't be avoided.
Great, thank you very much. And I see Potentially maybe a last hand up, even though I don't want to encourage anyone who still has another question after that. But Astrid, yeah, I see Astrid's hand raised.
Yeah, hi. I'm an art historian based in London at Goldsmiths, and I'm by no means an expert on Ukraine, but I did want to say, with regards to the question of complexities, that there is one artist who I've encountered a lot, who is Nikita Kadan, who's a very well-known Ukrainian artist. And I think that he did throughout the wartime, which obviously started in 2014, not just now, kept questioning and kept showing the complexities, including, I think it was Anakin who asked about the complexities and implication and collaboration. And I think he's dealt with that all the time, including the collaboration of the Ukrainians with the Nazis in the Second World War. And I thought that was all very brave to do that in a time of war, and where people are really only concerned with being victims of the Soviets. I mean, rightly so. He kept going with his general questioning. So I just wanted to contribute that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Astrid. So your comment was very right in time to, and your example, yeah, with collaboration of Ukrainians with Nazis. Yeah, so our going back to that history helps us to rethink what was it fact. Yeah, what did fact mean? And one of the explanation was that the previous experience of that territorial Ukrainian community with Bolsheviks was that bad and painful, yeah, that they choose another side in the war, yeah, where if they were aware of the danger to collaborate with Nazis or not, yeah, but for them it was the situation of a choice, and that choice was seemed not that bad.
Well, the Nazis,
yeah,
they hoped that the Nazis would help them establish their own state.
Yes.
False hope, of course. Yeah.
Yes. And going back to that time and finding the facts that give us a full picture of that situation also reshapes the memory, yeah, and gives us more answers, so we can reassemble our memory now and be more precise, maybe, yeah, know more facts.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. If the other two panelists didn't want to also react to this, I saw one last question in the chat, which I will read out now. And then I think this will hopefully be a perfectly timed roundtable. But someone is asking, are you observing variation across the country? For instance, I imagine art and culture to look differently in the temporarily occupied territories, especially with regards to what is allowed. I imagine art as resistance takes on a new dimension in these contexts. Do you have any insights into the art and culture scene there?
Oh, that's very, very sad to think about that. Yeah, but it's important to say that the right information doesn't come to us from the occupied territories. Yeah, we know how propaganda works there and how influenced are school theaters, for example. Yeah, but it's never art. Yeah, it's never a creative process. It's only mocking on and on making a picture of art. I would name maybe one of the great and brave examples of civic activism, like White Ribbon on this south of Ukraine, on occupied territories. Yeah, when people just post online tiny white ribbons put somewhere on the streets, yeah, or they write a note on a small piece of paper talking to Ukrainians on Ukrainian-controlled territories and saying what that they are here, yeah, and they're still in contact. Is it art? No, it's activism. It's documentary. It's just a way to give a sign that we are here, and that is for me is that much important that I remember always about them.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you very much. I think it is exactly 5:30, so I'm very thankful again to the panelists, of course, to everyone who joined today. I very much enjoyed our discussion, and I hope everyone else did too. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your evenings, or in whichever time zone you are. Wonderful next few hours. And yeah, I believe this roundtable will also be available online at some point, which I think I'm at least very excited about. And yeah, I don't know if the panelists want to say a last thing, but I think other than that, I'm very thankful to everyone today. Thank you.
Thank you. And
Yeah,
thank you
just
for
thank
great
you.
questions.
Great.
Yeah,
Thanks.
thanks everyone.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for this beautiful discussion. And I will end our event now. So yes, the recording will be available, I think, maybe in a week or a little bit more, because it usually takes time. So thank you again. And I hope it will be more discussions like that on our platform later. So see you, and I hope see you in the future. Yes, and have a great evening for today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.